professional conduct of law enforcement is sometimes a dangerous business. When a suspect chooses to resist apprehension and arrest, a peace officer's response needs to include a high regard for public safety. The decision to initiate, continue, and/or terminate vehicle pursuits is one where safety to the public, other officers, and the suspect is a vital consideration. How a vehicle pursuit is managed is as important as the ability to conduct the pursuit.
It's very important for law enforcement to be able to pursue. In the essence of any enforcement stop, and we're talking about vehicle pursuits here, so the officer initiates an enforcement contact by initiating the red lights and sirens.
I don't think that we consciously think about getting into a pursuit every day. I think that we go out and we try and do our jobs, and somebody commits a crime in front of you and they fail to yield to your authority, and we pursue based on the suspect's actions.
It's always a possibility. Every time you turn the lights on and initiate a traffic stop, it's in the back of your mind that this person could run on you. And so it's always there. You're always thinking about it.
I think officers understand that a pursuit is a very serious thing. The problem is that everybody thinks they can drive. It's not like shooting. People don't handle firearms every day, but they do handle cars every day. And people always think they're a better driver than they are. And that while they might be a very good driver, can they handle something? And this goes for both the motoring public, the suspect, and the officer.
At different stages in your career, the thought process of pursuits change. Initially, when you're a new officer, you think about the excitement, the fun. As you go on through your career, you realize there's consequences that are connected to the pursuits, such as liability. You really realize, should you get involved in the pursuits, and how important is it to continue or to participate in a pursuit?
Overall, statistically, we do a very good job in police pursuit. And it's a very emotional issue because of the police officer's job when a crash does occur or someone is injured. And obviously, we try to avoid any instance where someone's injured. But overall, officers are doing a good job. They're out there doing the job, they're getting in pursuits, and they're doing that activity very safely.
Pursuit decision-making and the specifics of your agency's pursuit policy should be an integral part of any departmental training program. In fact, such training is required by Penal Code 13519.8, which calls upon the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, POST, to establish guidelines and training for law enforcement's handling of vehicle pursuits. The original guidelines, published in 1995 and updated in 2006, required agencies to adopt and annually train their peace officers on a pursuit policy addressing each of the pursuit guidelines as a condition of immunity from civil liability resulting from vehicle pursuits. In this telecourse, updating the topics of vehicle pursuits and pursuit driving, we will look at 10 specific objectives. Summarize the impact of current legislation on law enforcement. Identify key training requirements of current legislation. Underscore the importance of agency policy and policy training for pursuits. Introduce the 15 guidelines developed in accordance with current legislation. Illustrate the key components found within the guidelines. Provide expert perspective and commentary on pursuits. Explore the ethical aspect of police pursuits. Underscore the decision-making elements within the dynamic, ever-changing flow of a pursuit. Identify the legal support for and potential consequences of the decision to pursue. And explore parallels in decision-making and reporting for pursuits and use of force. It is also important to establish clear definitions of terms you will hear in this telecourse, which include balance test. The balance test is an ongoing decision process to analyze the risk of initiating, continuing, and/or terminating a pursuit. If the threat to public or officer safety is greater than the need for immediately apprehending the suspect, then this pursuit should not be initiated or it should be terminated. Discontinue. Discontinue means to stop chasing the fleeing vehicle. Failure to yield. Failure to yield refers to the actions of a vehicle operator who fails to stop or respond to the officer's signal to stop. Guidelines. Guidelines are limitations, principles, and/or criterion to be considered in the formulation of policies. Intervention tactics. Intervention tactics refer to specific operational tactics. For example, pursuit intervention or immobilization technique. PIT, blocking, ramming, boxing, roadblock procedures, tire deflation device, spike strip, etc., intended to disable a fleeing vehicle or otherwise prevent further flight or escape. Offender suspect. Offender or suspect refers to the driver or occupants of a fleeing vehicle. Policy. Policy establishes the principles by which an individual agency is guided in the management of its affairs, such as whether to and how to engage and/or disengage in the pursuit of a fleeing suspect. Pursuit. Pursuit is an event involving one or more law enforcement officers attempting to apprehend a suspect or actual violator of the law in a motor vehicle, while the driver is using evasive tactics, such as high-speed driving, driving off a highway, turning suddenly, or driving in a legal manner but failing to yield to the officer's signal to stop. Supervisor. Supervisor is a person who has specific responsibility for issuing orders and providing direction to others. Terminate. Terminate is used interchangeably with discontinue. The passage of SB 601 in 1993 added to the Penal Code 13519.8, which required the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, POST, to establish guidelines and training for law enforcement's response to vehicle pursuits. Representatives of more than 120 law enforcement agencies contributed their experience, ideas, and suggestions in the development of the guidelines. Draft guidelines were reviewed by law enforcement executives and trainers, legal advisors, communications center managers, and public representatives several times before they were approved by the Commission and published in 1995.
During the course of the last 10 years or so, there have been an increase in the number of pursuits. There's also been an explosion on television of TV shows that show pursuits, and people become upset about pursuits, but yet they're very heavily watched TV shows because they're exciting and so on. And there have been a number of unfortunate situations. Unfortunate meaning that in all of these cases, the person who's injured is an innocent third person. The person who's injured is not injured by the police officer driving his or her vehicle. The person who's injured is injured by the individual who's fleeing. In the 37 years that I've represented law enforcement agencies, I have literally never been involved in a case where a peace officer chased someone who didn't first flee. That's what starts the process. Because of a number of different kinds of situations that evolved that started to get a lot more press, and then, quite frankly, a particular case called Nguyen versus the City of Westminster, where a pursuit had occurred. An officer pursued a fleeing suspect who had stolen a vehicle and failed to stop when directed to do so. And ultimately, the individual, the fleeing suspect, drove up onto a schoolyard and lost control of the car. And no child was injured, but the car slammed into one of these huge dumpsters, and Mr. Nguyen was struck by the dumpster and ultimately perished. And in the last 3 paragraphs of this Court of Appeal decision, where they ruled that the City of Westminster was immune from civil liability because they did, in fact, have in place a policy that met the requirements of 17,004.7, the Court of Appeal was brutal, quite candidly, in castigating not only the agency itself, but more importantly, and in a much broader way, the concept of this law, because it said, number one, the department didn't have to prove the officer was in compliance with the law, because that was true. All you needed was the policy. All you needed was that the policy be in place. If the officer was out of compliance, the department could discipline the officer, but it didn't affect the immunity that the entity had, as long as that policy was in place. The court also pointed out that the department didn't have to prove that the officer had received ongoing training, because the only requirement was initial training all the way back at the beginning, which usually occurred in the academy when the officer first went through the police academy. And so the court really castigated the entire system and said that the legislature should take a look at this, because it was putting the protections of the officer and the department in terms of civil liability before the protections of the public, which in all candor and with all due respect to the court, I personally felt was an affront to law enforcement. I've never met a peace officer yet who was involved in a situation where an innocent person was injured, where that officer was not distraught, even though he or she was not the direct cause of that. They still feel that, and it's very painful. That case decision precipitated legislative action. What Senate Bill 719 says is that if you want the immunity from civil liability, if harm is caused by or to a fleeing individual, then you must have a policy in place, and it must contain the following criteria. And it sets forth 15 different criteria, a dozen of which, as I've indicated, had already been involved in almost everybody's policies up until this time. In addition now is the criteria that you not only shall provide initial training, but you shall provide annual training for your officers. And the officers actually have to sign off on the certification that they received the annual training. Absent any of those provisions, if litigation results as a result of an incident, the agency will not have the immunity from liability that it's had. And quite frankly, there is a concern that the officers' individual immunity from liability could also be adversely affected. So there are multiple changes that have been implemented as a result of Senate Bill 719.
As a result of SB 719, Post assembled law enforcement trainers, managers, and executives, as well as public members, to update the California Law Enforcement Vehicle Pursuit Guidelines, 1995. This update provides factors to consider and additional resources, including case decisions and publications relevant to law enforcement pursuits. The guidelines and associated discussion present information that is important for law enforcement executives to consider when addressing the broad range of issues that are related to vehicle pursuits. These guidelines do not constitute a pursuit policy. The Commission intends that these guidelines provide a resource for each executive to use in the creation of a specific policy that the agency will adopt that reflects the need of the agency, the jurisdiction it serves, and contemporary law.
The real intent of the legislation is to make sure that the decisions are made in a proper manner, that they're made in full context of information that they can. And of course, the main intent of the legislation is what everybody should have as their primary objective, which is public safety and security, right? Serve and protect. And so this simply helps to clarify that, make it concrete.
The legislature has given us immunity as long as we do these things properly. And I think we have a real personal responsibility to take this to heart and make sure that we're doing things the right way.
The balance test is going on from the time you start your pursuit all the way through to the termination of your pursuit. And what you're doing is balancing the factors of why are you chasing this person? You're factoring in what type of vehicle you're chasing, the type of vehicle you have, what kind of mechanical situation it's in, your driving abilities, the suspect's driving abilities, the roadway that you're on, the area that you're in. Are you in a residential area? Are you out on the freeway? Are you in a rural area? The time of night comes into play. We bring up the school zone example. If it's a school zone at 3 o'clock on a weekday, then you shouldn't be pursuing through there. If it's a school zone at 3 o'clock in the morning, it's not a problem. It's not factored into the consideration at that point. I
immediately think of what I need to be thinking during the pursuit. What are the concerns I should have? Am I concerned for the safety of the public? Am I concerned for the safety of myself and fellow officers that might be responding or participating in the pursuit with me? Am I concerned about the location, the conditions? If we're going 90 miles per hour in a residential area, or if we're going 90 miles per hour during rush hour traffic, the balance test is basically looking at everything while you're driving in a potentially high-speed pursuit and still trying to realize that you have to be concerned about the public safety, yourself, the liability potentially to the department, and just making sure that you're looking at for the public safety and well-being.
The elements of the balance test are simple yet complicated. Simply put, it's in balancing whether you continue a pursuit or abort it based on those circumstances that are available to you at that time, all the information that you have. When somebody chooses not to stop, there are considerations both to initiate a pursuit and there are considerations to abort a pursuit. Things such as speed, evasive maneuvers, these types of things will key in an officer. This person is truly trying to flee from me.
Another way of thinking about that, or getting to the answer to that question, is you have to do a threat assessment. And that threat assessment is simply going to be, does this violator, before I start trying to chase him, pose an immediate or future threat to public safety? And if the answer is yes, then the need to immediately apprehend does outweigh the danger at that point, and you can go ahead and initiate your pursuit. If the answer to that is no, they're not an immediate or future threat to the public, then you simply go on to the next question, and that is, what's the nature of the non-compliant driving?
As you might expect, the balance test will be a recurring theme as we take a closer look at each of the law enforcement vehicle pursuit guidelines, including when to initiate a pursuit, the number of involved law enforcement units permitted, responsibilities of primary and secondary law enforcement units, driving tactics, air support, communications, capture of suspects, continuation or termination of a pursuit, supervisory responsibilities, pursuit intervention, speed of pursuit, interjurisdictional considerations, conditions of the vehicle, driver, roadway, weather, and traffic, hazards to uninvolved bystanders or motorists, reporting and post-pursuit analysis.
River City 871, failure to yield.
1041 with a failure to yield.
River City 871, westbound J, west of I-5, behind the white Subaru. Possible DUIs, leaving all over the lanes.
Copy, westbound J, west of 5, possible DUI. How many occupants do you have?
871, one solo occupant.
Copy, one solo occupant.
871, we're still westbound J, west of 5, approximately 25 miles per hour. 871, he almost TC'd into their center median.
Copy, one west of J, almost TC'd into the median.
I think the most important thing that officers need to remember is that policies are not always just liability driven, and the policies are not just to prevent bad public relations for the police chief. These policies are also designed to protect officers, because depending on what year it is, there's as many as 7 officers killed annually in this country in pursuits. It's about their safety too.
They need to know their policy. They need to understand what it is they can and cannot do as far as whether they can chase or not, whether to initiate the pursuit or not, and when to terminate or not.
All the policies, all the legislation should have no effect whatsoever because we're doing the right thing for the right reason. We're making those common sense decisions. We're using common sense on a second-by-second basis. We see that the pursuit's becoming too dangerous, we stop the pursuit. It's that simple.
8710. This is going to be a felony spousal battery. Occurred approximately 10 to 15 minutes ago. Ready to copy suspect info? Okay, suspect's going to be a male Filipino, 5'5", 125 pounds, 24 years old. His name is Mike Sumara and lives at 1234 Mockingbird Lane. And he's driving a 86 red Nissan pickup truck with primer on the driver's side door and red painted wheels, and no known weapons.
River City 87-1. Suspect vehicle just passed me eastbound H Street west of 2nd. To make a stop here shortly. River City 87-1. We're making a stop eastbound H just west of Elm. City 87-1, pursuit southbound Elm, south of H. River City 87-1 in pursuit, southbound Claire, north of J.
When an officer decides to initiate a pursuit because the suspect has committed a violation in their presence, be it an infraction or a misdemeanor, and the suspect decides to flee, there are several ways to figure out whether or not you know that person. Based on previous contacts, running the person's license plate, physical description, other information that you may have received from dispatch, if you can identify this person, you probably should not pursue. If you can get them at a later time through a warrant service, surveillance, or outside agency, then you should probably terminate the pursuit.
The factors that would determine if I'm going to initiate that pursuit, that there is a what appears to be a clear, immediate, or future threat to the public, depends on basically two types of conduct you're going to encounter. One type of conduct is maybe this person is already violent. They've already committed a violent crime with a severe threat of violence, or they've actually used force likely to result in serious bodily injury or death on somebody. Then that's obviously somewhat of a high threat. However, another way that that threat can exist is the initial want may not be for a super violent crime, and there might not have even been a felony committed at this point. Specifically, you might have a very, very drunk driver. I'm talking far beyond the one that's subtly weaving within a lane, primarily that person where the person calling in on the phone or when the officer sees this person for the first time before they even try to stop them, the first reaction is, holy cow, this person's going to kill somebody, because they're weaving wildly across the road, they're going through intersections, blowing red lights like they're not even there. That person poses an immediate threat to public safety.
The idea of the balancing test, the idea of being aware of all of the different potential factors, is something that not only has to be considered at the beginning, at the decision to initiate a pursuit, but it is incredibly important in the first few seconds. That is, you can't just decide to initiate a pursuit and then start thinking about how you're going to make your righteous caller at the end, right? Because it is something that unfolds over microseconds. In terms of how things come up, how hazards come up, whatever it might be. And the research has shown that 50% of collisions that happen during pursuits happen in the first 2 minutes. And that number goes to 70% after 6 minutes. So you can see that the vast majority of these collisions are happening in the first few minutes, 2 minutes really, of a pursuit. And if you're talking in microseconds, that's a long time. But if you're talking in normal people's perception, a few seconds or a minute goes by, and 50% of collisions have occurred, you have to be, the pursuing officer has to be clear-headed, has to be continually making these judgments, these assessments in the first few seconds.
If any officer has any time on the job, they're going to have a pursuit. They're either going to initiate a pursuit, they're going to be involved in a pursuit. That's the reality. Where it falls within an officer, I think if you asked any officer, any supervisor, anybody in law enforcement overall, they would not like to have to pursue a vehicle. In other words, they initiate a stop, an enforcement stop, and the violator chooses to flee. So any law enforcement officer, you talk to them out there, they would love for everybody to stop. So that's really what it comes down to.
Experience plays the biggest role, and you have to have thought about the pursuit occurring in advance. So that you have to get set in your mind what it is you're going to do if somebody runs from you. So you have to get that information out to the dispatcher. You have to know what information you have to put out. You have to try and control that adrenaline rush that's occurring.
Is this worth getting into? Is this one where you just need to shut down and say, we'll get this person the next time? What goes around comes around. And if this person is going to do this now, they'll probably do it again. So by breaking off the pursuit because this person is acting erratically, it lessens the potential for harm.
The balance test should be used as a guide in determining whether or not to pursue. Factors to be considered when using the balance test include public safety, nature of offense and apparent circumstances, officer safety, vehicle code requirements, passengers in the officer's vehicle, citizens, witnesses, and/or prisoners, pedestrian and vehicular traffic patterns and volume, other persons in or on the pursued vehicle, passengers, co-offenders, and/or hostages, location of the pursuit, school zone, playground, residential, downtown, and/or jurisdiction, time of day, speed of fleeing suspect, weather and visibility, road conditions, identity of offender, if known, or if the offender can be located at a later time, capabilities of the law enforcement vehicle or vehicles, ability of the officer or officers driving, availability of additional resources, whether supervisory approval is required, officers or supervisors' familiarity with the area of the pursuit, and quality of radio communications, range, clarity of signal, and/or no signal at all.
Get off! One, eastbound Broadway to 40. Approximately 20 miles an hour. This is 901 at St. Carlos and Broadway. Start fire with caution.
The number of units is determined by the supervisor, and each agency has their own policy that restricts the number of units that are allowed in a pursuit, and there's always the option for the supervisor to have an increased number of units. Again, this comes down to public perception. If we have 20 patrol cars chasing a suspect vehicle, it looks bad. There's always the potential for accidents, things to happen, the more cars you have involved. And so it's up to the supervisor to determine the number of units that are needed. And it really varies from pursuit to pursuit. If you're chasing a drive-by suspect vehicle that has 4 persons on board, you're going to need enough officers to take all 4 of those suspects into custody. So obviously you're going to need more units. So there's no one great answer as to the number of units required. From the public's perception, they're going to view a lot of patrol cars in a pursuit as probably being unnecessary. It's incumbent upon us to limit the number of cars to the actual number we need. And so going along with that thought process, the individual officers that are working have the responsibility to stay out of the pursuit if they have not been requested to join in. And they can do that. They can monitor the pursuit over the radio, but not by following along the pursuit, trailing the pursuit.
Most agencies have a pursuit policy that sets a specific number of units, and let's say 2 units plus the supervisor in a pursuit. Who makes the determination whether there should be extra units? It could be the officer in the primary unit, or it could be the supervisor. A lot of that depends on what you're chasing. If you're chasing a known dangerous felon, you're going to want as many extra bodies as you can to de-escalate the situation at the end of the pursuit. Talking about the adrenaline rush at the end of the pursuit and the capture of the suspect at the end of the pursuit, what you need is to de-escalate that from the very beginning. And the way you do that is by numerical superiority. When you show the suspect or suspects that you have numerical superiority, there's less chance of confrontation at the termination point. And that's why we always say that if you have 2 suspects, you want 4 officers. If you have 4 suspects, you want 8 officers. And that in itself will dictate the number of units you're going to request. If they're single officer units in a pursuit and you need 8 officers, then you're going to have 8 units in a pursuit. If you have 2 officers in a unit, then you might only need 4 units in a pursuit to get those same 8 officers.
It certainly could happen that more units are needed in the pursuit. A third unit might be a K-9. You might even have a supervisor involved in the pursuit, although if he's going to manage that pursuit, it's probably a good idea that he does not become involved. If you see more suspects in the car, you go from just the driver to maybe 3 or 4 passengers in the car. Now you might need 4 or 5 units, because if all these subjects rabbit or all these subjects come out of the car with guns blazing, you're certainly going to want more than 2 officers there to return fire. Depends on what you've got, and as the situation changes, you need more units in the pursuit. Also, if one of the cars becomes disabled, you can't have a trail of cars on the chance that one might get a flat tire, but on the other hand, you want other units tactically in positions so that if one unit does become disabled, you can get another unit in there fairly quickly.
You have to make that as you learn more facts of the case. If you have, for example, you have an armed robbery with multiple suspects, maybe 3 or 4 suspects that just committed a robbery of some type, and you have 2 officers in solo cars pursuing it. That is not going to be enough. So you would dispatch more people. Now, not necessarily do they have to be in the caravan of pursuing vehicles, as we see sometimes on television, but they do have to proceed to wherever this eventual end is going to be, because you're going to need more people. Oftentimes, they'll cross paths, and so then they will join the pursuit. But it doesn't have to begin with 6 cars in pursuit of 1 suspect.
There should be a clear understanding as to the number and types of law enforcement vehicles authorized to engage in pursuit at any one time. Such units may include primary, secondary, supervisor, and other agency-authorized units. Considerations of the number of involved units permitted should include type of units, marked, unmarked, motorcycles, K-9, etc., authorized to participate in a pursuit. Types of units confined to limited roles. Tactics and techniques authorized for units approved to trail or parallel a pursuit, such as traffic control in advance of a pursuit. Number of suspects in fleeing vehicle. Number of officers per unit or vehicle. Nature of violation or suspect offense. Characteristics of the location or area. Availability of air support. Availability of assisting agencies or jurisdictions, and traffic conditions.
The basics in a fundamental pursuit are the primary officer, primary unit. Their responsibility is they're leading the pursuit. They initiated the pursuit. Their responsibility is going to be to put out current information with regards to what the vehicle is wanted for, circumstances as far as if the suspect is, has changed direction, anything that is changing in the pursuit.
Responsibility of the primary unit is to put the radio traffic out to the dispatcher, describing the reason for the stop, the suspect vehicle description, the direction of travel, and any other pertinent information, number of people on board, that type of thing. The secondary unit's responsibility, once they join in the pursuit, is, in our policy anyways, to take over the radio traffic, frees the primary unit up for following the suspect vehicle.
Well, the primary unit obviously is the one that's in the hunt. They're the ones that are supposed to be on the suspect and trying to stay as close as possible within a reasonable and safe distance. The secondary unit's responsible for communicating what is happening between the primary and the suspect, where they're headed, what block they're in, what speed they're traveling, what the road conditions are like. So that's important. But the secondary also provides backup when there is a stop or when the person yields to the officer.
The secondary unit that's going to be support for the primary unit. They can assist in location, speeds. They can also assist in coordination with allied agencies. Their secondary role, because they're not right in front of the pursuit, is to assist with other things that the primary officer, since he or she is focused on the vehicle, it might be able to help out with.
My responsibility as a secondary unit is the radio traffic, given updates on the speeds, the traffic conditions, basically safety issues that are being brought into the pursuit, and also locations. Since usually high speeds are involved with a pursuit, your location is going to be changed on a continual basis. And if we leave our jurisdiction, of course the neighboring agency is going to need to be notified. So that would all be the responsibility of the secondary unit. If we're coming into an unfamiliar area where there's a lot of people, or there's too much traffic to be doing this right now for that kind of violation. So I think he's kind of the voice of reasoning for the primary car.
There's a couple of things the second unit can do. Second unit, number one, can keep from crowding the first unit, leaving his own space, following a safe distance behind the first unit, offsetting himself from the first unit so that he can see what the suspect is doing, so that the suspect crashes, the first unit avoids him, but the second unit doesn't. He needs to keep offset from the first unit. And then, because it's the second unit's job to be calling the pursuit, to putting out the information on the air, he can also be saying to the first unit, hey, you're too close, back off a little bit, watch out for that intersection coming up. He might be aware of things going on that the first unit, by his very nature, just is not aware of. He is not having to really track the suspect the way the first vehicle is doing. He's more hanging back, handling the radio traffic. The same thing as the supervisor is hanging back, not becoming involved. He can have a different perspective of the pursuit. Certainly the second officer in the pursuit can do the same thing.
I was a secondary officer in that pursuit. I called the pursuit. The pursuit was reasonable in speed. It was in the middle of the night. The only issue with that pursuit is it went into another jurisdiction, so we really didn't know where we were. We were constantly looking at street signs, trying to alert the other agency for assistance. That pursuit ended with the suspect going down a dead-end road. Obviously, she didn't know it was a dead-end road, and neither did we, but we ended up apprehending the suspect.
The responsibility of each authorized unit engaged in pursuit may change depending on the circumstances. The need for continually assessing the role of involved units should be considered. Considerations should include role of the officer or officers and/or supervisor or supervisors regarding initiating a pursuit, continuing or terminating a pursuit, changing roles in a pursuit, taking over a pursuit as the primary unit or agency, joining a pursuit in progress, driving tactics, capabilities of law enforcement vehicles, ability of officers driving, communicating with other officers, dispatch, and supervisors, operating responsibility for the pursuit, and conditions for authorizing additional units.
Suspects described as white males wearing hooded sweatshirts, armed with handguns.
Two males, dark hooded sweatshirts, orange handguns.
We got shots fired.
Unit 1033, repeating 1033, shots fired.
At the liquor store, suspect still inside, shots fired.
Oh man, shots fired. Okay, you gotta get there.
I need the ambulance.
Come on, move. Cause you hear the lights and sirens. Come on. Move. Let's go. Come on. Oh man, that's the liquor store located right there off the 79. The front door faces north. Let's see. I know if I get there first, gotta cover the front door. Get someone to come over and cover the west side of the building. It's a dead end street there, so there's no way out for them there if they're in the vehicle. Yeah, these sound like this guy's from the series. And the robbery's going on in the city. Come on, gotta get there.
When LA 4550 in Washington.
The more you have officers going code 3, the more they're driving with that siren. They're having to drive tactically, and then that will also carry over on those times when they're going to get in a pursuit. So if you're desensitized to all those stimuli that get you jacked up, you're going to be a little bit better off when you get into a good pursuit. The other thing is you have to actively manage your own responses. It's very difficult, especially if you don't do it often. So that would emphasize the importance of training and simulating that you're in pursuit, whether it be on the EVOC track or even in a driving simulator where you've got that siren going on. Because the more you're exposed to that siren, the less it tends to have an effect on you because you're desensitized to it. Another way officers can become desensitized is going ahead and more liberally using their Code 3 equipment when they're responding to calls that indicate there may be somebody's life in danger. It's common for the vocal cords to tighten under stress, so the pitches of voices come up higher. You breathe more shallow, which means you're not processing oxygen as well. So you have to take a minute while you're doing all this and make a conscious effort to breathe slowly and deeply, get yourself calm, and you'll be able to process and make better decisions as a result.
It's extremely important officers understand their own individual level of ability. We all have different levels of ability, and that's why the training is so important, because in the training that they receive at the academy, they are given the opportunity to learn their own individual levels of ability. It's not where they go through and they have to all achieve a certain level. They, more importantly, learn their own personal level of ability, which becomes critical when they're involved in that high-speed pursuit or they're involved in a Code 3 operation.
I think all the tactics blend together. If you're weak in steering, maybe you're real good with sight picture, as you might want to call it, looking ahead, seeing what's ahead. You might be real weak on getting on the accelerator, accelerating quickly, but you're very good when it comes to braking early. There's a lot of tactics going on there that combine to make driving a whole picture. So, and it would be hard to say that one is more valuable or more important than another.
The decision to use or not use specific driving tactics requires the same assessment considerations noted in initiating a pursuit and continuing or terminating. The balance test. Factors to be considered include spacing, the distance between vehicles, intersection analysis and management, caravanning, the number of units in line, passing, paralleling, training, and use of emergency equipment.
We're bumping speed right now.
Well, quite commonly, officers in our agency, we like them to get a request out for what tools they need. Obviously, if we have air support available, we want to get air support, and we utilize that extensively. One of the advantages of air support is that if a pursuit is highly dangerous, which it usually always is, we can go to what we call surveillance mode, where we have the helicopter take over the pursuit. It allows the pursuing units to return to the rules of the roadway, back off, get out of the chase altogether, and the helicopter will surveil them to where they get out of that car.
Air support can be nothing but a positive. The officer should be asking almost immediately. Most departmental policies will have an automatic kick-in. Once a pursuit is initiated, dispatch will automatically see if there's air support available. It's almost like a redundant request, but very often you'll hear a supervisor asking, even though it's already being checked, where is the air support? Depending on the jurisdiction, we in the Highway Patrol have several airships out there. However, there's, LA, the Bay Area. There are several jurisdictions where you have very large agencies that have aircraft available that assist. Now, what they're good for First of all, is there is rarely a time that I know of that an airship is blamed for something that happens in a pursuit because they're up in the air. It isn't, they're basically monitoring the pursuit. Now, you might have a suspect claim that they're running from the airship, but it becomes a very, very valuable tool in that you have somebody that's driving, and very often what happens is, let's say you have a situation where somebody's driving, the officer decides to abort the pursuit. He or she aborts the pursuit. You still have an airship overhead. Now the suspect thinks he or she's gotten away. Very often we'll see them start driving normally, pull to the curb, just kind of lollygag out of the vehicle, start walking. The airship's still way up ahead. He or she looks up, they're not getting away. So that's the one of the huge benefits is it allows officers to back off, either terminate the pursuit or back off and lower the danger level.
Aircraft can provide valuable assistance to the units and supervisors involved in a pursuit. Where air support is available during a pursuit, it is important that procedures be in place to facilitate coordination by the air unit and the ground law enforcement units. Factors to be considered include communications, intersection and traffic analysis, illumination, use of the spotlight, surveillance tactics, weather, number of air units, and aircraft safety.
A white Toyota van, Kansas plate, 46.
20 and a half, 1 male occupant. Hold on, he's got traffic in front of him. Let him get a little bit ahead of us. Let him crash. If he's going to crash, let him crash. 28, we're going to be eastbound on Peach Grove from Vineland. 28, we're still eastbound. We just passed Cahuenga. Can you notify Burbank PD? He just crashed. We're code 6, Hollywood Way in Burbank, ETC.
When initiating a pursuit, you're communicating with other officers. You're communicating with dispatch to let them know the reason why you're initiating the pursuit. You're also letting the supervisors know what you're doing so they're aware if there might be an issue that they might want to cancel their pursuit. So you're communicating with other officers, even potentially other agencies, depending if the pursuit goes into other jurisdictions. They may need to be aware of why the pursuit was initiated and whether or not they might want to continue the pursuit if our agency discontinues the involvement of the pursuit. So the communication would be for various reasons. Also to let officers know your reason for the pursuit, the description of the vehicle. This may be suspect description if you could see the suspect inside the vehicle, and location and direction and speed. There's all the conditions that are involved in the pursuit, such as weather, road conditions, traffic, things of that sort.
The dispatchers need to know where we are, what we're doing, and the conditions of the pursuit, speed, traffic conditions. The other officers also need to know where you're going. I've been in a pursuit where the radio traffic was good. It was getting over my head as far as how well I could drive. So another unit took the pursuit over for me. That was because we were, communicating.
The positive influence of communications, number one, is that any officer that is in a pursuit or any pair of officers that are in a pursuit with one taking lead and one taking responsibility for communications, they don't have to be in this alone. And if they give accurate feedback, give an accurate representation via the radio to the other units and to the supervisors, they can get some help in that decision-making because you are so wrapped up in what's going on. Even though you're very calm, you're very busy. And other units or the supervisor might hear something that might result in a more positive outcome by going ahead and directing you to shut down the pursuit, or they might figure something out that makes it important to continue this pursuit as well. So it's vital that officers use those communications to get that information out to everybody else.
Communication is a consideration for anything in law enforcement. Initially, when the primary vehicle broadcasts or makes the decision to pursue, those officers must communicate that with the dispatch center and also with the other officers in that area. Ideally, if a second officer is able to respond, the second unit should pick up the radio broadcasting so that the first unit can focus on the safety and evaluate the evolution of the pursuit itself. Simultaneously, the officers must broadcast this information to their dispatch center and perhaps even other agencies who share jurisdictional boundaries.
Communication is essential related to initiating, continuing, terminating, and concluding a pursuit. Factors to consider include notifying the communications center of the initiation of a pursuit, initial information broadcast by the primary unit. The initial information may include unit identification, location, direction of travel and speed, initial reasons for the pursuit, description of the pursued vehicle including license number if known, number of occupants in the fleeing vehicle if known, traffic and weather conditions, continuing updates and other pertinent information as it becomes available, such as additional crimes observed, control and coordination procedures, supervisor notification if available, agency or multi-jurisdictional communications, designation of communication frequency, and assignment of communications responsibilities, primary units, secondary units, supervisors, and air support if available.
City, 45-281. We are westbound, Bay Boulevard at 65 miles per hour approaching Broadway. Suspect vehicle is now turning northbound on Broadway. Suspect vehicle is coming to a stop.
Relax. Program clear. Who's got the car? Check the car. Check the car. Clear.
That's probably one of the most frequently brought up issues in the pursuit training and the literature is how do you control the apprehension at the end of the pursuit, given that the officers involved are probably in a bit of an adrenalized state. They also might have some fear going on. And as a result of this, they get impatient and they think they have to run up as soon as possible and start putting hands on people. You frequently see it when the suspect vehicle crashes. The problem is that officers have to realize if they do that, they are violating basic tactical doctrine. The other thing they have to remember are those areas right around a car, such as if you're driving up to or running up to the driver's window, that's a kill zone. Officers have been shot making approaches on cars under various circumstances, including after a suspect has collided with another car. Officers go up to that area and they get shot.
At the conclusion of pursuits, especially important for the supervisor to take control, perhaps even assign an uninvolved officer to take the suspect into custody, into booking. Avoids that personal contact between the officer involved in the pursuit and the officer and the suspect that he's taken into custody. The supervisor is able to make an evaluation of that at the scene. If he sees something, maybe the nerves are a little on edge, then he's going to calm the situation down and he's going to assign tasks and he's going to make sure that everything's handled in a professional manner.
That's probably the most difficult job in the pursuit with respect to supervision. And as the suspect stops or for whatever reason, and the officers converge, that's the highest potential for the emotions getting out of control. So I think then again, professionalism, go by your training, remember what you were taught, and try to maintain officer safety at all times. And if you don't violate those different rules and regulations, generally professionalism will prevail.
When the pursuit ends, you still have to keep your safety and your partner's safety still at the front of your mind. You can't, just because you caught the guy or the guy stopped, rush up to the car and be gung ho about it. You still need to do things properly, the way you're trained, the way you were taught. We wouldn't have a badge and a gun if we weren't able to control ourselves. And that's what you have to do. There's no gray area. You need to keep all your emotions, all the adrenaline that you had going during the pursuit. You need to control that. There's no option on that. You lose control, or your temper or your adrenaline get the best of you. Things aren't going to go good for you. You're going to have a lot of answering to do after that. It's just not worth it.
The safety of the public and officers during law enforcement effort to capture an offender is a consideration when a pursuit concludes. Factors to be considered include availability and use of an arrest team, use of high-risk car stop techniques, availability of additional units, physiological and psychological conditions of the officer, department use of force policy and options, and characteristics of termination location.
The most important thing about being involved in a pursuit is knowing that it's okay to cancel the pursuit. You might get some flack from your partners and from your peers, but the liability is just not worth it. It's not worth the short adrenaline rush that you get, and the consequences will just be, it could be just fatal. You don't want to take someone's life, an innocent life, because you were so engrossed and so involved in that.
It's a decision that they have to constantly evaluate during the pursuit to determine if it's worth continuing or not. The situation is very dynamic. It's going to be changing very quickly. And so they have to be prepared to reevaluate as they're proceeding down the street. And that's what this training will provide. We'll keep in the forefront, the road conditions, the vehicle conditions, the nature of the crime, the environment in which we're conducting the pursuit, the need to capture versus the need to protect the innocent bystanders. The question always becomes, well, why was he running? Or why was she running? Is there more to it? Well, you can't base your pursuit on what might have been. You have to base your pursuit on the facts in front of you today. And you're justifying the chase of this person because they ran a red light, and that's all you saw, whether they just robbed a 7-Eleven or not. They've run a red light, and you're chasing them for that. You need to let go. You can't worry about what they might have done.
One of the factors that officers take into consideration significantly is whether or not the individual is showing a blatant disregard for the safety of the public out in the streets and on the roadways. That's a very dangerous person, and it may be more important at that point to stop that individual as quickly as possible versus somebody who's just basically ignoring the rules and driving slowly through red lights or whatever the case may be.
For example, if the person's wanted for expired registration, suspicion of expired registration, and the person is fleeing at a high rate of speed through a school zone, that might be a consideration where the officer will say, this isn't worth it. I have the license plate. It comes back to a residence in the local area. I'm going to abort the pursuit because the danger outweighs, a minor infraction in continuing the pursuits.
This makes me think of a pursuit that I was in where I had to terminate the pursuit. The first concern I had was the suspects were violating all kinds of traffic laws. They were running lights at high speeds. They were gaining their distance on me to where there was like 2 blocks in between us, and I couldn't see exactly where they were at. And also, the reason for canceling my last reason was, it was initial reason was a traffic violation.
It's a balance issue between the need to apprehend versus the risk to the public. And by the public, I mean other officers, the officer that's chasing him, as well as the suspect himself, even though we don't always like to include him in a member of the public. We still have to look out for his well-being. The balance test is a continuous, ongoing type process. It's something you're weighing every single second. Circumstances can change in a second. So you need to say 1 second, the pursuit's okay, the next second it's not, and be ready to make your decision based on what you have at the moment.
San Diego 7702, be advised I have a visual of a small child in the back seat. I'm discontinuing. Request for air support.
Once that driver exhibits some behavior that indicates their driving is switched right over into that dangerous category, such as then they start blowing red lights or their speeds increase, then you have to be ready to immediately stop, to release that psychological pressure, hoping that they will resume normal driving behavior as soon as possible.
There are a lot of things that could change. As an example, you could have a small child all of a sudden appear in the rear window that you didn't know was in the car prior to that happening. You have to perceive that. That's going to take you about 3/4 of a second to realize that that head that just popped up belongs to a small child. You have the decision-making and the physical reaction to that. What am I going to do? Am I going to slow down? Am I going to terminate the pursuit? Am I going to continue the pursuit? If I continue the pursuit, am I going to back off a little ways? I need to notify people. What do I need to do? There are a lot of decisions that are going to be made in literally tenths of a second. And the entire time that that's happening, the pursuit is continuing on. And the officer has a lot of stress and a lot of adrenaline going on at that point. That's where the supervisor inserts himself and says, okay, I'm taking over control of this. I'm going to make the decision. I'm going to decide whether to terminate the pursuit. I'm going to decide to continue the pursuit. And it's at that level the supervisor becomes invaluable.
The visual manifestation of stopping a pursuit is basically just shutting down your lights, shutting down your siren, pulling over, and letting the suspect know, look, I am not chasing you anymore. And it's letting them know, hey, look, it's done on our end, and if they continue, the liability is now on that suspect because they are involved in what they want to do afterwards. It should let them know that they are not being pursued at that point, and there shouldn't be any question.
River City 45, 281, fill it to yield.
45, 281, 10-4, confirm your location.
That's to be southbound Bay, south of Boulevard. Got a gray Honda Accord. Rolling once, check on Arizona plate, please.
45, 281, 10-4, go ahead.
The Arizona 392, Paul Charles Queen. He's traveling at 35 miles per hour and still not stopping. We're approaching Marina.
10-4, approaching Marina. 45, 281, River City.
45, 281, go ahead.
45, 281, be advised your vehicle is associated with an at-risk missing person with suicidal tendencies.
Copy that. We're turning north on Marina. Still not stopping. Is that person armed?
45, 281, that's unknown at this time.
Copy that. We're going into Marina. Still not stopping. Go ahead and roll another unit.
45, 281, 10-4.
In today's society, the street officer is more aware of the issues surrounding pursuits. And I think officers are more willing to accept the direction of their supervisors because they understand the responsibilities and they understand the ramifications involved in pursuits. And so the officers, in fact, a study was done recently, and it's probably about 60% of the time the pursuits are terminated, it's terminated by an officer, not by the supervisor. So officers are showing more awareness that they have the responsibility to terminate the pursuit, and they even do it before the supervisor gets themselves involved.
First commendation I ever got many years ago was a written commendation for a high-speed vehicle pursuit that started in another jurisdiction, ended up going on Highway 101. It speeds in excess of 100 miles an hour. The letter of commendation for me was I kept the car in control, I was calm on the radio, I updated units as it quickly went through the jurisdiction into other jurisdictions, and it ended in the suspect nearly colliding with a large semi-truck, but that caused it caused the end of the pursuit. And I think those factors 30 plus years ago are still in effect. Is the officer in control? Is there clear communication as to what's going on? What are all of the conditions that you factor in those second-by-second decisions? We call it the balancing test. I would further expand that by saying it really is a constant thought process regarding the risk versus the benefit to the public, to yourself, to your fellow officers. When is it too much? When is it too dangerous to continue the pursuit? Nobody has a pat answer for that. It's going to be an individual decision, but you can think about it beforehand, and it'll help you immensely when you're under pressure.
There's a million things going through your mind. You're looking at the suspect and the suspect's actions. How fast are they going? Are they violating rules of the road? How many officers are in the pursuit? Is there good communication in the pursuit with the not only with the officers but with the sergeants? Because they're not usually in the pursuit. You need to continually analyze whether the seriousness of the violation warrants the continuation of the pursuit. You need to continually assess the situation, taking in regards public safety, weather conditions, road conditions. You're constantly analyzing whether this pursuit should continue or not continue.
The balance test is whether you want to continue the pursuit based on the threat that the pursuit poses to the public at large versus the type of crime you're pursuing the suspect for. And that ranges from a variety of things, whether it's a stolen car, a traffic violation, or a murder suspect, or maybe even a kidnapping suspect. That small child that pops up in the backseat of the car might have been kidnapped. What level are you willing to go to catch that suspect who just snatched that small child off the street?
What's your personal integrity? Comes into play here with regards to the balancing test, with regards to, all of us got into this line of work because we saw it as challenging. We also saw it as exciting. I've never met anyone that doesn't like to catch the bad guy. And when you're in a pursuit, you have that instinct that you want to catch that person. And to have that internal voice, if you will, that internal voice that speaks to you and says, let's evaluate this situation. We're going fast. Do we need to go fast? Do we know who that person is? If we do, can we catch him another day much more safely than being involved in a pursuit? Those, I think, are ethical issues that an individual officer needs to go over beforehand and during the pursuit. During the pursuit, you're focusing on your driving skills, communication skills, controlling your vehicle, and planning ahead for all those situations that you go over in your mind as the seconds click by. But that inner voice, which I'll call your conscience, is telling you, you know what, is this worth it? And it may far outweigh the danger to the public. It may far outweigh your own personal danger. And to be able to have that sense of honesty that says, you know what, it's time for me to shut down this pursuit. It just isn't worth it, is one of, I think, the background issues that we have to consider when we're dealing with vehicle pursuits.
And so the balance test again. The balance test should be used as a guide in making the determination to continue or terminate the pursuit. Factors to be considered include public safety, nature of offense and apparent circumstances, officer safety, vehicle code requirements, passenger and officer's vehicle, citizen, witness, and/or prisoner, pedestrian and vehicular traffic patterns and volume, other persons in or on pursued vehicle, passengers, co-offenders, and/or hostages, location of the pursuit, school zone, playground, residential, downtown, and/or jurisdiction, time of day, speed of fleeing suspect, weather and visibility, road conditions, identity of offender, if known, or if the offender can be located at a later time, capabilities of law enforcement vehicles, ability of officers driving, availability of additional resources, whether supervisory approval is required, officers and/or supervisors' familiarity with the area of the pursuit, and quality of radio communications, out of range, clarity, and/or no communication at all.
So where are we going for lunch?
No, you pick.
We did burgers yesterday.
All right.
I don't care.
Whatever you decide.
Hey, look at this moron.
Clear right.
Guys drive like a fool.
River City 1, we're in pursuit. Westbound Main at 1st Street. 5, Robert Victor Henry 716, Blue Mustang for speeding.
River City 1, copy. All units, Sam 1, copy. River City 1 in pursuit. Northbound, westbound Main from 1st.
Hey, isn't this the same guy that Peters lost last week in the pursuit?
Sure looks like it. River City 1, speeds 80 plus, traffic is moderate.
Sam 1, copy. Terminate the pursuit. Terminate the pursuit.
What do you say?
You heard him. He said terminate.
Let me terminate the pursuit.
River City 1 from control. Did you copy? Terminate the pursuit.
River City 1 copies 10-4.
You didn't even know what the heck we were chasing. We could have had the guy.
I know we could have had him. I want the jerk as bad as you do, but we've got to follow our policy and procedure.
This is bullshit.
I know it is.
The role of supervisor is crucial in that when you initiate the pursuit, your adrenaline's flowing, you have a lot of things going through your mind, you're focusing on capturing the suspect. The supervisor has the advantage of being outside of the situation, listening to your radio traffic, and deciding whether you should continue that pursuit or not. The supervisor's role then is to decide whether you should continue or not for the safety of you, the suspect, the public at large. It helps the beat officer by taking that pressure off of them.
The supervisor's job is to maintain control of all that without a lot of emotion. They're the ones that are watching the pursuit in a position where they have less adrenaline, they have management control at the line level.
They have to be able to sort of stand back and be the uninvolved party that monitors what's going on and decide whether that this should continue, it's going safely, officers are doing a good job, or if maybe the danger to the public seems like it's getting a little great for what we're chasing for, and then that supervisor will make their call of whether to code for or not.
The reality is that most pursuits, when they start off, they're not going to have a supervisor right there. Usually it's a primary unit is involved, secondary unit comes in, or a supervisor can come in at that time. Oftentimes, the supervisor on the radio is already monitoring the pursuit and can already oversee a lot of the judgment calls. In many agencies, you'll have multiple supervisors out in the field at that time. They monitor the pursuit. The supervisor will come out on the radio and say he or she is in position to be involved as a supervisor in the pursuit.
I think that as cops, we kind of, we don't want to quit. And we don't like to lose. We don't like to give up. We want to get that person because we all believe that, we're here to do a duty, we're here to do a job, and, we're here to protect people who can't protect themselves. Ultimately, you do what your supervisor tells you to do. If they instruct that you terminate the pursuit, then you discontinue the pursuit.
Factors to be considered by the supervisor include violation, justification for the pursuit, compliance with department policy, the number of involved law enforcement units permitted, responsibilities of primary and secondary law enforcement units, driving tactics, air support, communications, pursuit intervention tactics, speed, interjurisdictional considerations, conditions of the vehicle, driver, roadway, weather, and traffic, hazards to uninvolved bystanders or motorists, proceed to termination point, stabilization of incident, and capture of suspects.
Legal intervention move should be taken when the officer feels that continuing the pursuit, there is such a great risk to the public, other than the suspect fleeing, that terminating the pursuit is, and not terminating as in aborting, but legal intervention, in other words, stopping that vehicle, is so important. It exceeds any danger because I really need to stop this vehicle. Just to give a blind example is, somebody is fleeing, they're going right into a crowded event. You know there's going to be a lot of pedestrians there, and you really want to stop this vehicle before they get to this crowded pedestrian area.
Pursuit intervention is a valuable option that we have available to us. Some agencies have more options than others. There's the pursuit intervention technique, or also known as pursuit immobilization technique, PIT, commonly referred to, or you have the tire deflation devices. Both are very good options, and usually the earlier in the pursuit that you use them, the better, because you don't want the pursuit to get out of control. You want to be able to stop the suspect from continuing to flee, especially if they're showing a complete disregard for public safety. And by that I mean running through red lights, going through stop signs, going through crosswalks where pedestrians might be present. Anything that will put the public at risk. You want to stop the pursuit. What are you chasing? Are you chasing a murder suspect? Are you chasing somebody who just kidnapped a child off the street? Or are you chasing somebody for a traffic violation? All that will play into the decision whether to use any kind of intervention technique.
We use quite a bit with our department is the PIT immobilization technique. Very effective tool. We know that once that suspect is fleeing, it's only one intersection away from a serious collision. And if we can stop that pursuit quickly and efficiently by using the PIT technique, we are going to do it. We think it's a very valuable technique that we use whenever we can.
I believe intervention resources are very important in pursuits. You have to have options. In San Francisco, we do have spike strips. We've had that program for about 2 or 3 years, been very effective. I think the officers have to know that there's other options rather than just chasing them until they run out of gas or they crash.
We need to train our officers and educate our lawmakers as to whether this is a good procedure or not. If this is an opportunity to stop this vehicle and stop this felon from fleeing and who's going to endanger other lives if they get away, then you can employ that technique. And again, the training ahead of time so that the officers realize when and if and how they can employ that tactic needs to be up front.
Factors to be considered in the use of pursuit intervention include training on the method and or tactic, type of vehicles involved, such as motorcycle, car, SUV, speed, location of the pursuit, road conditions, occupants of the suspect vehicle, pedestrian and vehicular traffic patterns and volume, weather and visibility, department use of force and or shooting policy, and nature of the offense.
Once you start moving, and you start moving at a higher rate of speed, your brain recognizes that the things that are off to the side aren't going to be as big a hazard to you as those things that are directly in front of you. And so your brain automatically tells your eyes to look directly in front of you, and you develop what's known as tunnel vision. I think the adrenaline rush itself and the speed of the vehicle helps to create that tunnel vision. Studies have been done to show the faster the car is going, the more tunnel vision you get. Your brain understands that the faster you go, the bigger hazard you have is directly in front of you. Where if you're parked at a curb, if they did an eye test on you, they would find that the average human being has about 180 degrees of peripheral vision.
It's very hard to keep yourself in control in a high-stress situation. You're driving the car fast, the siren's on, the radio's crackling with traffic. You're trying to concentrate on your driving skill, yet keep the suspect under observation. You're listening to the radio. 1,000 different things in your body and your mind are going on together. It is so important that sense of professionalism, that sense that you've thought about this beforehand, you've practiced it, you've been trained on it, you've talked with your partners in the field about what would happen. All of those things come into play so that it's almost a smooth transition.
Following distance, you have to keep an eye on your own speed. Realize how fast you're going and leave maneuvering room between you and the suspect and you and cars on the other sides, on either side of you. And you have to realize the speeds that you might be traveling. Slow speed pursuit, 20, 25, 30 miles an hour, no problem to stay 2-3 car lengths back. In a higher speed pursuit, you start losing track of whether you're going 80, 90, 100, 110, 120. That's difficult to leave 12, 15, 20 car lengths back, because if the suspect makes a turn, then blacks out, then makes another turn, all of a sudden you've lost him. But better to lose him than kill yourself or kill somebody else.
Getting your distance back is very critical. It helps you manage those physiological responses. And that is one of the myths. Officers think that if they basically ride the bumper of a suspect during a pursuit, that it will intimidate him, send him the message that you cannot get away from me, when in reality that tends to actually push the subject to drive harder.
Factors to be considered by a peace officer and supervisor in determining speeds throughout a pursuit include public safety, nature of the offense and apparent circumstances, officer safety, vehicle code requirements, passenger in the officer's vehicle, pedestrian and vehicular traffic patterns and volume, other persons in or on pursued vehicle, location of the pursuit, time of day, speed of fleeing suspect, weather and visibility, road conditions, identity of offender, capabilities of law enforcement, ability of officers driving, availability of additional resources, whether supervisory approval is required, officers and/or supervisors' familiarity with the area of the pursuit, and quality of radio communications.
Most counties have a chiefs association with the sheriff and the police chiefs meeting monthly basis, quarterly basis, and it's in those interjurisdictional meetings that they can develop the policies regarding treatment of high-speed pursuits or any vehicle pursuits. Each agency develops their own individual policies, but those policies and procedures have to mesh with the surrounding jurisdictions so that there is a consistent policy when it comes to crossing city boundaries, going into the county, going onto an interstate freeway. All of those things are happening far too quickly for you to make those considerations as the event happens. Those all have to be settled beforehand by the heads of the agencies working with their management staff, the other agencies' management staffs, and coming up with a consistent plan that's going to work in the real world.
You want to have a protocol established ahead of time that allows for you guys to link the channels immediately so that the pursuit can be monitored. But if it becomes something where it leaves it one jurisdiction, that they have the ability to get out of it again. before the pursuit, what you need to work with is with your communication center, whether be it regional or individual. Many jurisdictions I'm involved in have a regional dispatch center, which actually makes it easier because you already have the majority of the people in your area on the same system, if not the same channel in some cases. But that work has to go up front. You have to be able to say, if this event occurs, whether it's a pursuit or a multi-jurisdictional disaster, earthquake, things like that, we would need to be able to go to a common frequency.
The most important factor is communications. You have to advise your dispatcher that you're going into a jurisdiction so they can make those officers aware that you are entering their area and you are in a pursuit. You need to make very clear whether you need their assistance or not. If you don't need their assistance, then that needs to be made very clear on the radio so that they don't join in the pursuit unnecessarily. Also, there may be come into play where you may want them to take over the pursuit. You're entering into an area where you may have limited communications. You may not know the roads. You may not know where you're at. And so if you can get that other agency to take over that pursuit, you can drop out and they know where they are. They have the communications necessary and they can relay accurate information.
I think the most important thing to remember about interjurisdictional pursuits is just because another agency has pursued somebody into your jurisdiction does not mean you have to engage in that pursuit. I think it's important to be available to assist officers for safety purposes. However, their rationale for their pursuit may not be something you would be chasing this person for.
And I think if everybody throughout the state pretty much gets on the same page, with a few variations, of course, the pursuit can be very successful from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
Factors to be considered in an interjurisdictional pursuit and or requesting interjurisdictional law enforcement resources during a pursuit include supervisory management and control of a pursuit that enters another jurisdiction, communications and notifications among agencies involved, assistance available from the agency into whose jurisdiction the pursuit enters, responsibility of an officer or employee who becomes aware of an outside jurisdiction conducting a pursuit within the employee's jurisdiction, procedures for the agency to provide assistance, including assuming control of a pursuit, any agency limits prohibiting involvement in an outside agency pursuit, any limits on the number of agencies and or units allowed in pursuit at one time, coordination, management, and control at the termination of an interjurisdictional pursuit, responsibility for any arrests when the offender is captured, and factors which might warrant relinquishment of a pursuit to another jurisdiction.
Weather condition, roadway condition, how busy is the traffic, are there pedestrians nearby, what type of area, what time of night, all those things come into play. It's crucial that you have a reality check on your own abilities. If you presume that you're a much better driver than you actually are, you're going to get in over your head and you're going to potentially hurt yourself or hurt others. You factor in your driving abilities, and that comes down to experience quite often, what experience you have driving. You factor in the abilities of your vehicle that you're driving, and you weigh that against the abilities of the driver that you're chasing or the vehicle that he's in.
You know, there's a myriad of consideration. As I said, there's speed, weather conditions, the environment around, and that is constantly changing also. Very often pursuits will start in a city area and go out to a rural area. Speeds change, driving behavior changes. Even what the vehicle and or the suspect is wanted for actually changes within the pursuit. It's very important to know one's limitations when it comes to any police activity, and pursuits are right up there towards the top because it happens so often, but you still have to be trained and ready to know when to say when to say this is too much, it's beyond my skill level.
As a police officer, you're taught during all kinds of situations to stay calm, stay focused, and to look at everything. You do the same thing during a pursuit. Even though it's a crazy time, everything is going 100 miles per minute, you still need to focus and realize, okay, I have to look at this. I have to look at the speed. I have to look at the conditions of the pursuit, where we're headed. Should I continue the pursuit? What did I put out the information? Did I update dispatch on my location? And it's just, you just need to focus yourself, focus your emotions and your feelings to get the information out, because it's important that everyone knows what's going on within the pursuit.
We've had pursuits go in the snow, and deputies have decided once we hit the snow, it's time to cancel the pursuit. Those are real-world conditions in the mountains, very different conditions than in urban areas. Those are part of the parameters of when you judge, and embedded in all of these laws, these legal exemptions in department policies, is that issue of ethics. Ethics is embedded in all of this. You can call it common sense. I really think it's that ethical decision. Is this pursuit of this subject worth it? Is it worth it to the public safety? Is it worth it for the officer's safety? Is it worth it for the other officers who are going to get involved in a vehicle pursuit? Those questions are ethical decisions that have to be made very quickly. You don't have time to reflect on those questions. And under the new statute and the new policies, you've got to make those decisions very quickly. It used to be the old 60-second rule. I think it's more like the 10-second rule. As the seconds click by, you're evaluating all these issues. Is it worth it to the public? Is it worth it to me? What are the speeds involved? What are the weather conditions? What's the roadway conditions? What's my vehicle condition? What kind of vehicle am I pursuing? Is it a high-performance vehicle, or is it a vehicle that I can maintain sight of? Those are hundreds of considerations to make as the seconds click off.
I think one thing that officers are reluctant to admit is when they should drop out, when they feel like they've reached their limit, and they don't want to go right up to the 100% level of this is as far as I can go. They want to go up to 90 or 95%. They always want to leave a little bit of cushion because you're probably going to go beyond it. You exceed the 100%, now you're up into the 105%, you just might go overboard. Certainly, considerations like that, a situation change like that, would tip that balance scale to where now you're looking at seriously terminating the pursuit.
The balance test is ongoing in the dynamics of the pursuit, constantly weighing the risk with the need to apprehend. Other factors to be considered include conditions affecting vehicles, type, condition, emergency equipment, capabilities, conditions affecting drivers, physiological, psychological, abilities, roadway conditions, width, surface, weather conditions, rain, fog, ice, snow, and traffic conditions, heavy, moderate. Part of your continuing consideration are the inherent hazards in the pursuit of those in the path of the incident, uninvolved bystanders, and/or other motorists.
It's extremely important to be aware of where you are during a pursuit. If you know you're approaching a parade and you're going 60 miles per hour and the suspect is continuing to increase their speed, maybe you might want to cancel that pursuit. He may not stop. They may continue and go through the parade to try to get away from the police. So you have to be aware. It's very important to know what's going on around you. And if you see there's a potential for someone to get injured, then you go ahead and cancel it. Cancel the pursuit. Sometimes the suspects get away, but it's just more important to be aware of the public safety and be concerned for that.
The public has to have faith in us to keep them safe. It's this dichotomy of you're in a pursuit, you're trying to catch a bad guy, but now somebody else gets hurt, and usually an innocent party. A perfect example is we rarely get, now civilly there might be an issue. However, when the suspect, him or herself, is injured or killed and as a result of a pursuit, that doesn't get nearly the attention as when it's a third party. That's when it becomes a huge issue.
I think in asking these questions that we're talking about, doing the threat assessment, both the threat assessment on the initial threat that the suspect does or doesn't pose. And the threat assessment of the nature of their evasive driving is you have to understand there are thresholds. And in the case of the non-compliant or evasive driving, if you're in a 35 mile an hour zone, but the suspect is at 30 miles an hour crossing intersections against stop signs or red lights like they're not there, well, most people would think, well, it's only 30 miles an hour in a 35 mile an hour zone. But the problem is most of our bad crashes happen at those intersections, and you have to realize that a 35 mile an hour impact, such as in a T-bone collision, can pretty likely result in serious bodily injury or death, depending on the nature of the vehicles, how old they are, etc.
So we're doing pretty well in California for this population that we have. Now, you might think 51 out of 500, that's 10%. We're only one state. But you got to remember, California's, got a huge population of bystanders, huge population of criminals, huge population of law enforcement. So we have more than our share of pursuits. Collisions in pursuits are no more likely than collisions in general driving conditions. So what that tells you is that the officers involved, as they're doing this incredibly risky and incredibly dangerous pursuit, are doing an amazing job of it, because the chance of there actually being a collision is extremely low compared to if Joe Citizen was engaging in that kind of behavior. These are highly trained professionals. They know what they're doing.
There are far more officers who are injured and or killed in the line of duty because of car accidents than any other cause of death. And so from just a real-life practical perspective, driving is dangerous. Driving at a high rate of speed to try and apprehend somebody who is ignoring and violating the law has to be, by definition, even more dangerous.
It's in our nature as police officers to want to apprehend the suspect. At the same time, you must consider the potential danger to not only yourselves, but the citizens who you are sworn to protect. It's that balance test that keeps the officers alive and the public safe as well. Better to win the war and lose the battle.
Factors to be considered include public safety, nature of offense and apparent circumstances, officer safety, vehicle code requirements, passenger and officer's vehicle, pedestrian and vehicular traffic patterns and volume, other persons in or on the pursued vehicle, location of the pursuit, time of day, speed of fleeing suspect, weather and visibility, road conditions, identity of offender, if the offender can be located at a later time, capabilities of law enforcement vehicles, ability of officers driving, availability of additional resources, whether supervisory approval is required, officers or supervisors' familiarity with the area of the pursuit, and quality of radio communications.
Suspect vehicle is coming to a stop.
Steer in! We steer in! Get out of the car! We steer in! Drop the gun! Drop the gun! We steer in! We steer in! Free Rumbo! Hands up! Hands! We steer in! Hands on the ground! Free Rumbo! Hands! We steer! Drop the gun! Go! 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 Get out! Stop! Freeze! Freeze! Get down! Get down! Get down! Get down! Who's got the car? Check the car. Check the car.
What I want to do is ask you guys if you have any questions about what happened or how things went.
Yeah, we've never been so fortunate to have this many vehicles in a pursuit. So I'm kind of curious, do I add the sheriffs and the CHP vehicles into this pursuit, or do I not put them in here?
No, you only put on the units that were involved from our jurisdiction. The other agencies involved fill out a form for their units that were involved and forward it to us, and then we put the whole package together and send it to CHP.
Hey, Sarge, every time we go to the jail, we got to fill out a new form. Now you're telling me every time we get in a pursuit, we got to fill out another form?
It is just a matter of filling out the boxes, so it is easy to fill out. It's not a big deal report, but it is very important to us because it really does us a service as far as compiling statistics statewide on the pursuits that we do. And I want to make sure that everybody understands that it's important that no matter how long the pursuit is or how short it is, you need to do one of these reports. So I know it's another piece of paper, it's a little bit more work, but please take the time to do it and fill it out right. It's not that much work. It's fairly easy to do. Anybody got anything?
Hey, Sarge.
Yeah, Jim.
One of the things I saw was when we all came to a stop and we all got out of our cars, we had a huge crossfire situation. We had CHP in front of us and us coming from behind. It really set things up to where if this had become a shootout situation, we could have engaged each other.
And that's a good point to remember if you find yourself in that situation, to be aware of what's downrange so that you find yourself in a crossfire situation, you're aware of where your nearest cover is, things like that.
I'm not sure who yelled crossfire, but whoever did, it worked out because at that time I saw the CHP unit. He actually reholstered up and went behind his patrol car to take cover just in case, as I said, a gun battle occurred. So that's good. It's one of those things where it's multi-agencies and you don't know what's going to happen. It's not picture perfect, and but he did take cover, and someone yelled crossfire. I'm not sure who it was, but it worked out. It's good.
Good point, and we need to remember that every situation is going to be different. He took that tactic, it worked that time, it might not work the next time, but we have to remember that crossfire situations do occur, and we need to keep our heads up and be aware of what's downrange from us, and just do the best we can with each situation as it arises. Okay, if anybody has anything else they need to talk about, we'll hit it at tomorrow's briefing. Let's go ahead and go to work. Thanks, everybody.
In briefing, you talk about a pursuit, what went right, what went wrong. Sergeants can be very effective in encouraging the discussion about, did you hear about this pursuit that happened in another jurisdiction? It ended well. Let's talk about what went right and focus on those issues. And it really is that preparation that you spend in training, that mental preparation, because everybody, it's the first step is to get in a pursuit. I think the very second and critical point is, how do you end the pursuit? And I'm happy to see more and more officers taking it on their own initiative to get on the radio and say, you know what, I'm ending the pursuit. It's just too dangerous.
Post-incident evaluation is one of the key components to training. With regards to actual incidents that have happened, either pursuits that have happened there in the area and adjoining areas, involving other jurisdictions, other law enforcement agencies, it's very important because one of the components is lessons learned. Nobody likes to be critiqued for things they did wrong, but one of the other sides of it is stress what went right. Most pursuits end up very successfully. Nobody gets hurt. All the policies were followed. And stressing how important it is to follow those procedures is good.
We're required to go over our policy every year when we receive our evaluations one-on-one with our supervisor. And then obviously if a pursuit does happen on our shift, we debrief it at the next briefing. We talk about policy, what was good, what was bad, what we could have done different, how communication was on the radio, how many units were involved, what everybody did basically in the pursuit, because not every unit, not every officer is involved in a pursuit, but everybody knows that it's going on, where everybody's just not there because there's other stuff going on. So we try and debrief the incident after one happens.
Whenever we have a pursuit or an agency within our county has a pursuit, we discuss that at roll call. And the reasons for the pursuit, where the pursuit went, how it was terminated, whether there was foot pursuit at the end, all the different things, crash at the end, all the different things that come into play. And so that is, even though we may have not had a pursuit in a month or two, we can still reinforce to our deputies the reason that we have to front load this information, whether we're going to pursue or not.
Sometimes when you debrief a pursuit, other officers who weren't involved, it gets them thinking about some of the other things that you may not think about, such as the liability. And initially they might have thought, oh, wow, it shouldn't have been canceled, when after debriefing, they realize, oh, that was probably the right thing to do, and I need to start thinking of those things, thinking about the balance test and how I need to look at the totality of the situation and realize, is it that important to continue the pursuit?
Post-pursuit analysis can assist in the overall management of pursuits, policy development and implementations, and can identify trends and training needs. Factors to be considered include administrative review, audio-visual evidence, if available, and circumstances associated with pursuits.
Learn from everything that you experienced and say, I'm going to do this the same next time. I'm going to do this differently the next time. The bottom line is that nobody got hurt and you successfully had a pursuit, even though the guy got away, because you're going home that night.
Exercises extreme caution. No matter what we're chasing them for, we're putting people at risk. We're putting our own officers at risk. We're putting the bystanders at risk. And even if the person is a very serious offender, we need to use caution as best we can. Our goal is to apprehend these folks and to get them off the street so they don't, injure or hurt others. But we want to do it in as safe a manner as possible.
We've all been there. Everybody's been there, and unfortunately, you're going to be critiqued. Everything goes on, everything's documented, everything's micromanaged. And as a manager on the California Highway Patrol, I'm part of that. Every agency is going to take a look at it. Just think about what you're doing and realize that we've all been in the same boat. Do the best you can, and always consider that there's always a next time. There's always a plan B.
Well done pursuits. Pursuits that have solid tactics, solid procedures, and a successful arrest. For me, and I quite frankly think many police managers, are a pleasure to see officers using their training, using their tactics, using the new devices we have, whether it be road strips or spike strips or the pit maneuver, and using those effectively to quickly bring an end to a chase are, I think, very positive, not only within a department, but all the way up the chain of command. We're very proud of officers who do good police work.
Law enforcement is about keeping our communities safe for the citizens we serve. Every decision we make as peace officers needs to have that objective in mind. Unfortunately, there are those who would put us, the public, and themselves at risk by their chosen behavior and their efforts to avoid apprehension or arrest. The balance test, the ongoing decision process of weighing risks against the need to apprehend, is a valuable tool in choosing to initiate, continue, or terminate a vehicle pursuit. If the threat to public or officer safety is greater than the need for immediately apprehending the suspect, then the pursuit should not be initiated, or it should be terminated. For the California Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training, I'm Pat Matthews. Thank you.
It's an incredibly difficult job. I've always said, and I continue to say, I have no idea why anybody wants to do it. It's amazing to me, but I'm very grateful that they're out there for a whole variety of reasons, not the least of which is I'm an extremely devout coward, and somebody's got to be out there to protect me. So.
Let's be careful out here.